子祥访谈录 Real People, Real Story.
In this life, there's a lot of things we lose we don't have understanding of. Like when I left Nigeria, I didn't realize it was the death of my world.
But
I didn't realize, I mean, I was sad, but I didn't know it was that sad.
But at the time you were only 13.
I was 13.
You were still a kid.
Right. So you don't have words for it. You don't have language. You can feel sad, but you don't understand. And so you don't have a process.
Speaking of the challenges, as I read your book, I remember you said that as you left Africa to come to the States, you felt as the door of the airplane closed, you felt like you left the whole world behind you. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
When I was 13, I had grown up in Nigeria, and I assumed that I was going to be going back to the States. So there was, that's in my mind. But when I was 39 and I was doing some journaling that became my first book, I realized how much sadness I had then, because really and truly the day I got on the airplane and they closed it behind me, my world did die because I never saw those friends again.
It died?
It died. I mean, nobody died.
They're not disappearing, they just died.
You have internet then, you don't have whatever, so, the market and all the things that smelled like home, the Harmattan, the Dustinier by Christmas, everything was gone, except my family. And then we're going to go see Grandma tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I be sad? That's not supposed to be my world. I've got all the good. And so you just put it away.
Right.
And that was why I had to look at it later and see how deep it was. Then a year later, my parents left to go back to Africa, but we didn't have schooling then, for American schooling for high school. So I stayed with my grandmother, and that was when I realized at 39 when I was journaling that my family died in a sense, because we were never 6 children and 2 adults again, but there's no funerals for those things because nobody really dies.
Right.
And so you don't process, you just sort of push it aside and you go on. But I didn't talk to my parents or see them for 4 years then. That's how we did it in those days, because schooling was important. And
no funeral, which means that if somebody actually dies, we usually have a funeral. People can get together to recognize this event, to memorize this person or the life events. But for you, leaving Africa to come to the States, there is not a formal event to act like a funeral.
Right.
So you don't have a formal opportunity to kind of release your thoughts.
Your grief. You can't process the grief because grief takes time. It's a process. When somebody dies and it's obvious, everybody comes and they acknowledge the grief. Oh, I'm sorry. We know what happened. Mm-hmm. We're sorry that happened. And then we remember that person and we say, oh, that's just wonderful. They were so good. They were so this. And then we have the ways of saying goodbye. We have the service, the eulogies. We have the burial. We have all those things. And then we can go on later. And it takes time. But in this life, there's a lot of things we lose we don't have understanding of. Like when I left Nigeria, I didn't realize it was the death of my world.
But
I didn't realize, I was sad, but I didn't know it was that sad.
But at the time you were only 13.
I was 13.
You were still a kid.
Right. So you don't have words for it. You don't have language. You can feel sad, but you don't understand. And so you don't have a process. One of the things we do when we work with families, we try to teach them how to say goodbye.
Right.
And we tell them to build a raft, which means first you try, and if you don't have good relations with somebody, you try and fix it so that you don't have to be embarrassed to come back. But then to say thank you to people and to thank them for who they've been. To make sure you say goodbye, not just to people, but even to your place. Place is very important. So for children, taking pictures, making sure you can remember.
Right.
And to say goodbye to your pets if you can't take them. And even possessions, because the things that are our possessions, like I have my ring. That's from Liberia.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow, that's a very beautiful ring.
Well, it's a V ring. So these little things hold our memories.
It's
and
a
they
V
remind
ring.
us. Yes, it's a V ring.
It means victorious.
Yes, and they made it when Winston Churchill came to visit. And
Oh, really?
he always used to put up the V for victory for the,
I thought that's what Chinese people always do when they take photos, which I don't understand what it means.
I don't know either. But anyhow, so that's what we try and help people do now is, in a way, how do you make a funeral when you're going to say goodbye? Because sometimes parents think, well, if I just take them and we just go, they won't notice. I guess they think that. I don't know. And so they just don't tell the children, and maybe they just take them later, or they tell them right at the end. But children need time also to process goodbyes, because grief does take time. You can't just do it in one day. So that was the kind of things we didn't know when we were doing it, because we didn't have any understanding, and so that's why I do what I do, trying to help people do it better.
And in terms of coming to a different country and environment, you said that, there's grief, there is a disappointment, there's a lot of things to say goodbye to, but especially for people from China, when they come here as a kid, they also face a very different scenario because they don't necessarily speak English that
Right.
well. I mean, facing a totally different environment, plus the language barriers, which is gonna multiply the difficulty, several times. I know some family. Initially they come here. Their daughter or son was crying every day. They don't want to go out because they fear the outside world. So how would you suggest them to cope with that process then?